Hi, I'm Rashanah Baldwin, a journalist, a Chicagoan, and a millennial bringing light to everyday stories that matter. I share the type of stories that mainstream media ignores or gets wrong. The news of the neighborhoods, the news that matters. Here is someone you need to know. Meet Pastor Jonathan Brooks. You are the pastor of Canaan Community Church here in Englewood, and you're also an author. And your book is called Church Forsaken, and I got a chance to read some pages, some chapters. Forgive me, I haven't read it all, but you're doing great work in the Englewood community. You are a young millennial pastor. We want to note that there. Tell us, the world, the city of Chicago, what is the climate like right now in Englewood with everything that's happened since the global pandemic? There's civil unrest until now recent, as we're in August 2020, and we just saw another situation of looting as well as a little bit of civil unrest.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I appreciate all the hard work you do and have been doing for years to keep the narrative positive in our community and not allow people to brand us by a singular one. And so I'm just thankful for you being a advocate for the good in Englewood and just being who you are. I talk about her in my book too. So that's the page that she probably read. Make sure you get that book. I shout out Shannon B on there because of all the good work she's been doing for all these years. So, but yeah, when we talk about the climate of Chicago right now, I think the first thing I would say is there's a cloud kind of hanging over the city right now that I don't even think began necessarily with the pandemic. I think it began really when people started to awaken to the fact that the way things are in the city is not the way that they have to be or that they were supposed to be. Around the segregation we see in the city, around the way certain neighborhoods have been neglected for decades, the way that there's lots of investment in certain places and a lack of investment in others. There's so many things that I think, especially people of color, were awakening to. And then when we hit the pandemic hard in early March, I think what happened was everybody was now at home and everybody was consumed with social media and TV and all, because we couldn't go anywhere. And I think all of those things that we had already kind of been unearthing, they just blew up because now they were in our face all the time on our social media feeds over and over and over again, no matter what city you lived in. And we had already been crying some of these things, especially after the Laquan McDonald police-involved shooting a couple of years ago. But then when George Floyd happened, it was like, see, this is what we've been talking about. You know, when you look at all of the other just stories that happened, you know, continuously, and Ahmaud Arbery, and then, you know, just looking at all the stories, it was like, this is what we've been talking about. And you saw it explode. That cloud that I'm talking about, while it's a cloud, I don't think it's a cloud of despair. I think it's really just a space where we're finally saying, if we as the people don't begin to work together and speak up and actually be agitators to the system, then we'll never see anything change. And I think this has become a season where people are saying things have to change. Even the pandemic, even watching the coronavirus and its disproportionate effect on Black and brown communities, right? Like how our neighborhood was hit so hard with the coronavirus because, first of all, we couldn't stay home because we are all essential workers. Everybody, if you got a job, you got to go to it. You know, and then like, you know, as a pastor, I'm looking at like how it impacted my congregation, how creative we had to become in allowing, you know, helping people financially, making sure we could help people with their bills and rent payments, mortgage. Like it was just another way of thinking. And what it made me realize is like, this is what the church should be all the time, you know? And so it really just, I think it's awakened places of worship. It's awakened civic leaders, it's awakened residents and community organizations to realize how we should be working together at all times. I mean, me and you were just talking about watching all these different organizations working together during this time, you know, even just recently on 57th and Racine, looking at who was all together there, trying to keep peace between the neighborhood and police during that time. You know, folks who I know didn't really talk to each other that much before this are now out on the streets working together. Yeah. So, yeah,
it's an interesting time. Where's that collaboration coming from with residents in Englewood, as you just stated? You knew people who didn't talk to each other, but now coming together. Where is that sense of community? I mean, I believe it was always there. I mean, you know that, but we're still divided. Where is that? What do you believe that's coming from? And will it continue?
I actually think there's a few reasons. One I just named. One is because I think this time has helped us to see that unless we work together, we won't actually reach the goals of which we strive for as a community. We've set some serious goals, you know, around revitalizing, rebranding, all the different things that we've said. But I think the other reason is I think we're starting to see the impact that's made. Like when one area of the neighborhood or one organization begins to suffer, we're actually seeing a domino effect of how it impacts all the rest of us as well, right? It's not like, oh, well, they lost their funding or they, you know, it's like, wait a minute. There were things that we were doing in partnership. There were people that I know who had a connection to that organization or that association who now don't have that connection, and what are they going to do, right? And so we're trying to fill in cracks. You know, I'm even seeing that with churches, right? Like, whereas it's like, oh, that was their area, they work in that area, but then you start realizing, well, if something happens in that area, and now that person who was there is no longer able to be there, then what are we like? What are we going to just leave people out with nothing? You know, 57th the Racine with Pastor Grant doing the 7 Pastors 7 blocks. When he got his church building and started to do more work around 67th or Halsted, that left 57th like vulnerable. And I'm like, well, my church is on 55th, so we need to be stepping into that space. You know, those type of things.
Right. Yep.
I think the collaboration is happening because we're starting to see that and realize that.
With the civil unrest that happened, it sparked a nationwide, almost global civil unrest, because we saw different countries overseas also, you know, saying enough is enough with the police brutality. Now here back in Chicago on the South Side, we saw, as you just said, what happened on 57 and Carpenter. You as a pastor, how do you control or spread the truth to those younger individuals who are oftentimes led down the wrong path, or oftentimes led to do what we saw on Monday morning, Saturday, Sunday, late Sunday, to that redirect that anger, that attention, because it's really dangerous. It's really dangerous because what's what we're seeing on a lot of the lives, and even in person, these people are getting younger and younger.
Yep.
Also women, young girls who are also provoking the police and agitating the police. And we know, me and you know, as residents of the community, we don't act like that, but now they're getting encouraged or being pumped up to do as such and agitate and incite the police. And we even saw that, you know, most recently, maybe a month and a half ago, with the young girl who cried wolf downtown Chicago at Grant Park, saying that her teeth were knocked out, but you saw the video of her touching the police and agitating the police. What do you say to that? What do you do as a leader, as a pastor in Englewood to your congregation?
That's an excellent question, Rashanah. And I, you know, this might sound like I'm like stroking your ego a little bit or like really promoting, but it's the truth, right? Like the work that you do and the around narrative and like the way that I've lived my life as a pastor of really trying to promote the positive aspects of a community and balance the singular narrative that media and the city often portrays on our neighborhood, it really is key. Like when you can help young people see that really you're falling prey to what they desire for you, right? That's been my main message to the young people that I've been talking to in my neighborhood, is like, they set up a singular narrative as our neighborhood as a place of poverty and violence, right? And when they set up that narrative, what they're doing is they're saying, this is what we're ascribing onto you as who you are and the place you live, right? And so what we're saying is, this is what we expect of you anyway.
We expect you to do that, and if you do anything opposite of that, then you're not from here, or where did you come from, or how are you telling about this great community? How are you thinking to say that there's, you know, good happening in this neighborhood?
Yes. And when we fall for that, versus actually looking around, like I tell them all the time, do you believe you live in a place where it's just violence and poverty all the time. And every single time you're like, well, no, right? Like there's all types of great stuff that happens in my neighborhood all the time. I'm like, but do you ever see that on the news? Do you ever see that being portrayed out? And they're like, rarely. And I'm like, exactly. It's very intentional. And so I think the number one thing that we have to do as a generation above them and ahead of them is to help them to combat the internalized narrative that they've taken in, right? It's one thing for media or politicians or whoever to create a narrative and describe it onto a community. It's a whole nother thing for the community to actually internalize and believe that for themselves. Because when you believe it for yourself, you will perpetuate it even more than the people who made it up, right? Like you'll say, no, that's who we are. I'm gonna make sure you know that's who I am. Oh, so this is a place we're gonna loot downtown in, or we're gonna tear up our own neighborhood, or we're gonna whatever, because we begin to actually believe that that's who we're supposed to be. So my thing is like the work that you do, this whole idea of pushing against the dominant narrative that's been layered over our neighborhood is actually the biggest work. I remember sitting in our former mayor's office, Rahm Emanuel. So before Lori, like maybe not even a year before, I was sitting in there with alderman folks, and he got frustrated with me, and he just asked me, he said, well, what would be your solution to gun violence, since you say that what we're doing, like more policing, is not working? And I said clearly, I said narrative change, tell different stories. I said, that means the police officers will have to think different about the places they police. The people will have to think differently about the places they live. The media will have to portray a full narrative of the place, right? Like the politicians can't run on, oh, well, in this neighborhood, we're gonna stop violence, versus saying we're gonna invest in a neighborhood and put more economic development there and more housing, right? Versus just saying we're gonna put up more police cameras, and right, like that's how they run. That's the platform they run on in our neighborhoods because of the narrative. When we start telling different stories, people have to believe or see the full picture of the place and begin to think about it totally different. If I live in a neighborhood where my life is not valued because my neighborhood is not valued, then why do I care about your life, right? Neither one of us matter because our neighborhood don't matter. I could take your life, you could take my life, and who cares? So we have to begin with the work that you're doing. This is the foundation of changing the way we live in the world. It is to see every person in every place as beautiful and broken, not one or the other. And my religious background helps me to realize that I don't think that's the way God sees it. God's not looking down the Englewood going, oh, I can't stand that place, they need to get it together. And he's not looking up north of the Gold Coast going, now that's what I was talking about. They got it down pat. No, there's brokenness and beauty everywhere. And the work you're doing is really key.
How do the residents who are out here doing the work that you just mentioned, that work that's not sexy, that work that's behind the doors, how do we get these young kids to understand that that type of work is needed, that type of sitting down in these meetings, not jumping in front of cameras, giving those great sound bites and becoming YouTube sensations, not only coming out to when you have a social media hot flash and then record yourself. How do we get them to understand that this process is a slow burn, that it's not sexy, it's not fun? Me and you go to these meetings that quite frankly, I probably honestly agree that we are so tired, but we need to do the work. It's like years of planning, years of talking to elected officials, pushing them, getting them to change policies, stand on their neck. How do we even get them to understand this is the first step to change a policy? You can't only just be in front of the camera screaming at the police, but you have to be behind the scenes and realize it's not going to happen in 2 months.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have done poorly in our mentorship of the next generation is that we have not explained the difference between
community activism and community organizing.
Thank you. That's exactly the term. That's the exact terms I need. We have created a generation of activists
who like to act, who
love to act, who love to be seen, who love to make noise, who love to do the rah-rah, but don't like to sit down and actually follow through to see the organizing of power and structure and like see like what actually can change if we sit down at the table. Right? Activism is necessary. Right, because it's what gets the attention. It's what makes sure that a situation is made aware. But awareness is not enough. When I want to move from awareness to actually seeing like things change, then you got to move into organization space. And I believe that comes with relationships. So we gotta build relationships with the young folks to be able to be like, hey, why don't you come with me to this meeting? I saw you out there protesting. I saw you out there being active. Now I want you to come see the next step in that activism. And that's actually walking with it through to fruition, like making it happen.
Well, what if they say, let me interrupt you. What if they say, Jonathan, well, you know, I'm tired. These peaceful protests don't work. And what's wrong with you know, for example, us working with or having Black Lives Matter Chicago come in and help us protest the police. What's wrong with that? Because we've been doing that for so long, and we've been saying we talking to the police. I think this is the best way to do it.
Yeah. So I remember first hearing the stories of Dr. King's relationship with Stokely Carmichael, right? And Stokely was like, "Look, man, I'm tired of this marching, and look, Black power. Let's go take it, And Dr. King at first was like, "Hold up, homie, like that ain't what we on. We ain't trying to fight white power with Black power." And blah, blah. But as Dr. King spent time with Stokely, and as Stokely spent time with Dr. King in their relationship, they actually began to realize where the other person was coming from. So you started hearing some of the quotes from Dr. King later on in his life, and he's going, I'm wondering whether or not, I was marching Black folks into a building that was actually already burning down, or you hear Stokely saying, I do understand why you need to have folks that power will want to talk to, right? Like you can't only have the activists and the hardcore. You got to have somebody to say, look, you either talk with him or you're gonna have to deal with us, right? Like I think there needs to be a marriage between the two, and that's what we got to help the young folks understand. Is like there's a place for what you're doing, but there also is a place for the long, slow work that's been happening. We need both and not either or. And we need you to understand both sides of it, because we also need you to know when you need to put on a seat and sit at the table versus when you need to put on your fatigues and be on the block. There's a space for both of those, right? But you don't get, like, if it's only either or, that's when we find ourselves in trouble, when we can't understand the both and.
You're absolutely right. That's a great segue into my next thought, my next question of, oftentimes we hear these blanketed statements by community activists, the newer ones who are a little bit younger than us, me and you, who say we need resources, and they throw out, blanketed statements, very vague, we need resources, but they don't really understand what that means or how to clearly articulate what they're asking for, because we know someone can say, well, we just opened up a grocery store for you. Right. We just had a whole food pantry. That was a resource right there. Right. So I know what it means to say we need resources and we need accountability. What do you believe that to mean, and how can we get that clearly articulated when they say we need resources in this community? What does that mean? What does it really mean?
Yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word. Because you're right? There have been so many strides that have happened in the neighborhood over the last 10, 15 years, right? That show that resources have been coming to our neighborhood. I think really what people are saying is we need equitable resource. Like we need equity to happen, which means that if a neighborhood has been neglected for decades, that means that the way that resources are funneled, whether those financial resources, economic resources, housing resources, educational resources, they need to be disproportionately driven to the neglected neighborhoods. So it's not only that we just need better schools, we need disproportionately more funding coming to our schools. It makes no sense that our neighborhood have been neglected for 50 years, and then as soon as school closings happen, 3 out of our 4 high schools are gone, right? No, it should go the opposite direction. There should be a disproportionate amount of resources, education coming to this community because of the amount of disinvestment. Same thing with housing, right? There's no reason. I think it was you who gave me that about West Englewood, where we had the highest number of demolitions and the least number of new constructions. It should be the opposite, right? And so when we talk about resources, specifically, I say we ought to talk about 4 major areas. We have to talk about economic development, exactly, huge. We need jobs, we need all of that, right? We need educational development. So we're talking about, making sure that schools are taken care of, making sure that we don't have 10-year-old books in the classrooms, making sure that technology is updated, making sure that teachers are paid fairly, making sure there's equity around the table around educational resources. So you got that, you got then residential and housing, which another reason why me and Rashanah are so cool, because she's always been an advocate for housing, right? I live in a community. Well, I see houses torn down all the time and nothing being placed. There's so many vacant lots in our neighborhood till it just drives me crazy. And then I think the other one, which is one this is kind of near dear to my heart, is around health, right? Like health and wellness. Access to health and wellness, not only just like reactive healthcare of like hospitals, but how do we get proactive in providing better food options and education around food and cooking and organic living, and then not just throwing prescriptions in our neighborhoods all the time, but telling people what the doctors don't want to tell us, and that we can naturally heal our bodies without actually taking more medicine that's making us sicker in another area while we try to heal something else. So all of these things are like things that have been disproportionately stripped from our neighborhood. So when we talk about we need resources, what we're saying is we don't need you to spread across the city equally all the resources. No, we need you to say, okay, these neighborhoods disproportionately, they should have a greater amount of the budget coming to them, as well as being educated about how the best way to spend it for that neighborhood. Like I think that's the conversation we're not having.
And what you just named is maybe the 4 basic pillars of what makes a community thrive: economic development, housing, health, and jobs, and safety. And these people looking inside out don't see that. The younger generation who are right under the millennials, us, they don't understand what that means. And I also believe, as you just also alluded to, it's a level of accountability, because you can bring those resources in it, but make sure they stay. Because we're seeing closures of hospitals. We saw Mercy Hospital announced. We know that 3 other hospitals was trying to merge together with Mercy to stay and not leave, because they can't afford to stay in a community that's being, again, pillaged of resources. And people don't really understand from the outside looking in of what that means when we say we've been taken advantage of. Our communities have been left without these basic resources needed, and what it means to really have them stay and be held accountable. Again, I can go on a tangent, but a prime example was Target on 87 stores. Who held them accountable to stay after they got tax money? And this is what kind of makes me upset when I see these young community activists who don't understand that or see that or really see this is what we're talking about when we say a level of accountability, and also being at these meetings and plannings and debates and strategy sessions to make sure that when you go screaming resources to the camera because you think that's all we need, you need also is a level of accountability to those elected officials who come into our community.
That's a longer, slower process.
It's a slow burn. It's a crock pot. You have to put it in a crock pot and let it burn, let it slow cook, because we're not going to allow you to come back into our community until you have X, Y, and Z on paper, and there's some accountability if you decide to default on this.
That's right.
The last thing I want to ask you, because you have a book, Church Forsaken, and a lot of the work that you also do deals around social injustices and criminal justice reform and just fighting for fair civil rights of our Black people. Why is it that we in our community, Black or brown, that we always have to protest for better or equal access? And I'm gonna give something even very specific, and I hope whoever watched this interview don't get mad. Why is it that we always have to protest to be hired for jobs that come into our community, whether it is the creation or building of Whole Foods, whether it's the creation or building of the new Kennedy King College school that came back in 2004? Why is it that our people who are willing and ready and able to work have to go even protest, even most recently with the school, to say, make sure you hire us? I was like, that, and this is what needs to get out to the media. This is what these young activists need to see and understand.
Yeah.
So why does that keep happening?
So ultimately, everything that we're dealing with, and we're talking about, whether we're talking about racism, whether we're talking about classism, whether we're talking about inequitable distribution of resources, all of it is around one word, and it's power. It's all about power. And what we have got to be able to do in our communities is be able to understand that we actually have a power base and don't have to pander to those who find themselves in power to in order to, like, can you give us a little bit of your power so we can come up? That's not really what needs to happen. Everything that we have, actually, everything that we need, we actually already have. The question is, can we come together and recognize that, we have lawyers, doctors, bankers, healthcare professionals, all that already in our communities. But because we've lost the value of our own neighborhoods and the value of our own communities, we're dispersed all over the place and no longer can build a base. When you look at the history of this country, you will see that the African Americans especially were at their strongest when we actually were not allowed to be a part of the larger society. And I'm not saying that we want to go back to that, because I don't think anybody should be telling me where I can live or telling me, what my value is. But I need to be able to value the fact that my doctor looks like me, that the person working at my store looks like me, the person working on my house looks like me, the person doing construction on the new building that's going down the street looks like me, that I can walk my kids past them and they can see an African-American man or woman working arduously and doing something for a career that they can aspire to. Those have far deeper ramifications than just, oh, we need jobs. It's about providing the line of sight for our young people to be able to aspire to things that maybe we didn't even know about, right, when we were growing up, which elevates us as a race to be able to say, now, Kamala Harris coming in, like, we're going to have our first, right, I believe they're going to win, our first African-American, female, period, in vice presidency, right, or in the White House. And I'm just like, y'all, that's now something for my daughter to aspire to. That's something for Black women to aspire to. It's like, oh, yeah, we can be vice president. We can be president, But until you see it, it's always the inevitability of you saying, I can't do that. It's clear. So I just think that it's beyond just the point of, oh, we need to be working in our own communities. Because yes to that, absolutely. But it's also, what are we allowing the next generation to actually be able to aspire to for what they see? And that's why we got to reestablish the value of our own neighborhoods, stop running from them. Because we always want to be the only Black person at the so-and-so, versus starting a Black business in a Black neighborhood where Black kids will be able to see Black greatness. I just think that there's something to that we have to get back to. It's not to the chagrin of any other race or any other, but I don't go to Chinatown and see a whole bunch of Black folk working in the shops, right? Like there is a clear aspiration of a young, Asian American kid who can go in and say, hey, I can do this. I could be a business owner. I can be a doctor. Because they see it. And so that's what I think that's the part that we're missing sometimes is the implications on what do we see Black people being? Entertainers, rappers, right? So what do our kids aspire to be? Athletes, rappers, and
How do we get them to see differently? How do we, and you talked about changing the mindset and changing the narrative. How do we really, what is a way to drill down on that message of getting the young kids to just see it differently, to even just start without their hand, without looking for something quick, fast, a quick, fast, gimmick, or a quick, fast trick, or quick, fast, easy way to make money? I don't think it's one answer to that, but what would you say is a way to how do we get that message to the young ones who are doing a lot of the chaos?
Yeah. I'm going to always lean towards personal relationship, mentorship. Actually, like, when you ask the average person our age who they mentoring, who they walking with, who's mimicking their life, they don't have a long list of kids or young folks behind them they mentoring. We've been so busy grinding, which makes sense, trying to get our own thing going, that I think the generation before us actually did a better job. Now, I may get some pushback from that, but on the whole, like, at least I can point to somebody who took some time to walk with me and say, hey, this is what life is really like, and I want you to have a better one than I did. I don't see that as much with our generation for the next generation. I see us going, they need to get it together. And so I think personal relationship, mentorship, grabbing one of these kids and really walking with them. You know, I had people I could call on my phone when the looting started and said, "You better not be out there. You better not be out," because they value my voice. You know, who I knew was out there the first time, right? And I'm like, I bet not see you out there this time. You know, like I'm not. I remember what you told me the first time. I didn't go. You know, that type of thing. Who do you have that you call in that you can call on that you have that kind of influence on daily? And I think the other thing I would add is just that the voices that they hear through music, through media, like they need to be balanced. And I think that our generation spends a lot of time speaking to our generation. We make music for our generation, we make, movies for our generation, and versus saying like, how do we speak into this current generation? So some of our music might have to sound a little different so we can get a different message out to them. So that's just my own soapbox thing of like, I don't like trap music like that for real, but I think there needs to be some artists in our generation that have a different message. You need to be making music that sounds like that. So that's just an example.
Your final thoughts. What could you, if you had a magic ball, what would you like to see happen in Chicago on the South Side, specifically in Englewood, a year from now?
Yeah. If I had a magic wand, the first thing I would say is I would love to see a true love, care, commitment for the neighborhood from its residents. And not from a handful of residents, but from its residents. I will wave that wand and people would love this neighborhood with all their heart. Because I believe from that love would stem people who will fight for what this neighborhood needs. The second thing I would probably want from it is to see true investment in the community. An investment that matches or at least tries to balance the scales of the disinvestment that people have had to endure for the last 50 years. So, my thing is simple. Love your neighborhood well. Fall in love with the place where God has put you. And if you fall in love with it, you'll fall in love with the people. If you fall in love with the people, then you'll begin to fight for the people. If you begin to fight for the people, people will begin to fight for you. And what happens from there is that everybody's life is better. If you want to see flourishing happen in our communities, it begins with a full love for the place and the people or where God has put you. I have no other answers.
If someone, was in need and wanted to reach out to you, is your church open? Can they contact you? Can they come visit and get worship and prayer? Can they come to Canaan Church? Or, you read a couple chapters of your book to them. How would they do it?
Absolutely. So we're not open for Sunday services right now, but our church is basically a community center. So there's still stuff going on all the time. We're located on the corner of 55th and Paulina at 1701 West Garfield Boulevard. You can reach us at 773-925-0185. You can visit our website, canancommunitychurch.org. Canaan is spelled C-A-N-A-A-N, so canancommunitychurch.org. And if you want to just get connected with me, I'm open book. You can find me on social media at Pastor J, and I spell it P-A-S-T-A-H, the letter J. And that's also my website is pastorj.com, spelled the same way. I respond, I talk, I engage. I just want to see us all fall in love with our places to the point to where we're trying to make it better. This city is a magical place, and it's a special place, but we all have a responsibility to keep it that way. So reach out.
Thank you, Pastor Jonathan Brooks. You were amazing. Appreciate this. And I know we will chat soon.